My dog can find your daughter." The words were spoken gently, almost respectfully. Daniel Whitmore did not turn right away. He stood at the edge of the stone patio, staring toward the open iron gate that separated his perfectly kept backyard from the street beyond. The faint sound of fiddles and laughter drifted in from the Riverside Harvest Festival down the block. It was a bright Saturday afternoon, the kind neighbors described later as beautiful and peaceful. There was nothing peaceful inside Daniel's chest. He turned slowly. Annie stood a few steps behind him. 6 years old. Dark braids tied back neatly, grass stains on her knees. In her small hand, she held the leash of Daisy, the long-eared hound Lily adored. Daniel blinked once, steadying himself. "I'm sorry," he said, voice tight but controlled. "What did you say?" Annie lifted her chin slightly. "My dog can find your daughter." Daniel exhaled through his nose, almost a sharp laugh, though there was no humor in it. "We have security checking the neighborhood," he said carefully. "The police are on their way. There are officers already at the festival entrance." His words came faster. "They have trained dogs, tracking units." He shook his head once, as if correcting a misunderstanding. "This isn't a game, Annie." She didn't flinch. "I know, sir." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. He was a man used to problems that responded to planning, structure, expertise. "You hired the best people. You trusted professionals. You did not improvise with hope. Daisy is a hunting dog," Annie continued quietly. "She follows scent." Daniel glanced down at the hound. Daisy sat calmly, ears relaxed, eyes soft. She looked more like a family pet than a search animal. "Hunting rabbits isn't the same thing," Daniel said, more to himself than to Annie. "This is different." Annie nodded once. "Yes, sir, it is." He noticed something then. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't insisting. She was simply explaining. "She can smell Lily," Annie said. "Every day they play. Lily smells like strawberries and grass, and the soap in your upstairs bathroom." Daniel's jaw tightened. Strawberries. Lily's shampoo. He hadn't known Annie paid attention to things like that. "That doesn't mean she can track her through a crowd," Daniel replied. "There are hundreds of people down there. Food stands, smoke, music. You can't just..." He stopped himself, catching the edge in his tone. He knelt down, bringing himself level with Annie. His voice softened. "You understand this is serious, right?" "Yes, sir. And you think your dog can find her?" "How?" Annie hesitated only a second. "She needs something that smells like Lily." Daniel frowned. "She already smells her all the time. But she needs it strong," Annie said. "Like when my mom makes chili and the whole kitchen smells different. Daisy follows the strongest smell." Daniel studied her face. "What do you mean, something strong?" Annie's eyes brightened just slightly. "Lily's bracelet," she said. "The pink one with the little silver heart. She wears it every day. Or her blue sweater. The one she doesn't let anyone else wear." Daniel felt a flicker of recognition. The bracelet. Lily rarely took it off. It had been a birthday gift. She slept with it on. "She wasn't wearing the sweater," Daniel said automatically. "It's warm." "But the bracelet," Annie replied. "She wore it today." Daniel stood slowly. He remembered fastening it on her wrist that morning when she had asked him to make sure the clasp was tight. She had held her small arm out proudly, as if it were a royal jewel. He swallowed. "And if she dropped it?" he asked suddenly. Annie shook her head. "She wouldn't. She loves it." There was a quiet certainty in that answer that unsettled him more than bold confidence would have. Daniel looked toward the open gate again. The festival music rose and fell with the wind. A burst of applause echoed faintly. Security officers moved along the sidewalk outside the property. Radios crackled. Procedures unfolded the way they were meant to. Order, systems, control. Yet here stood a 6-year-old child offering something that had nothing to do with systems. "Even if I gave Daisy the bracelet," Daniel said carefully, "what makes you think she could follow it through all that noise?" Annie crouched beside Daisy and placed both hands gently along the dog's neck. "Because Daisy listens with her nose," she said, "not her ears." Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. For a moment, he almost smiled at the simplicity of it. Then reality returned. "This isn't like following a rabbit trail in the woods," he said quietly. "There are cars, streets, people." "Yes, sir." "And if she loses the scent?" Annie met his eyes again. "Then we keep trying." There it was again, that steady tone. Not stubborn, not naive. Faith. Daniel looked down at Daisy once more. The hound's tail tapped lightly against the stone, as if sensing the tension in the air. He stood upright and called toward the house. Maria. She appeared in the doorway almost instantly, apron still tied, worry etched across her face. Sir, go to Lily's room, Daniel said. Bring me her jewelry box. The small white one. Maria hesitated only a second before hurrying inside. Daniel turned back to Annie. I'm not promising anything, he said. The professionals are still in charge. Yes, sir. I don't want you running off into a crowd. I won't. And you stay beside me the entire time. Yes, sir. He nodded once, as if formalizing a contract. Maria returned moments later, holding the small white box. Daniel opened it with hands that felt unfamiliar to him. Inside lay the pink bracelet with the silver heart charm. He picked it up carefully. The metal was still warm from Lily's skin. For a second, his composure wavered. He crouched again and held the bracelet out toward Daisy. All right, he murmured, almost to himself. Let's see what you can do. Daisy leaned forward, nose touching the bracelet. She inhaled deeply, once, then again, her body subtly shifting, as if a switch had been turned. Daniel watched, skepticism still anchoring him. He was not a man who believed easily, but as Daisy's ears lifted and her posture sharpened, something inside him loosened just a fraction. Show me, he said quietly, and though he still did not fully believe in a hunting dog's power against the chaos of a crowded festival, he found himself willing just barely to follow. Daniel Whitmore had held the bracelet like it was a fragile piece of evidence, not a child's cheap charm. The pink band looped in his fingers, the tiny silver heart catching the sun for a second, before slipping into shadow as he crouched. Daisy's nose touched the bracelet and stayed there. One long inhale. Another. The hound's posture changed so subtly that Daniel almost missed it. Her ears lifted, no longer relaxed. Her chest expanded, ribs working like bellows. She wasn't excited in the way a pet got excited for treats. She was focused, tuned. Daniel's skepticism didn't vanish. It tightened into something more practical. If this was nonsense, it would become obvious fast. Stay close, he told Annie, forcing his voice into calm. Do not let go of that leash. Annie nodded once. Her small fingers wrapped more firmly around the worn red strap. Maria hovered behind them, hands folded at her waist, eyes darting between Daniel and her daughter. The old instinct of a woman who had spent years measuring the moods of wealthy people. Daniel saw that instinct and, for the first time, it bothered him. This wasn't about status. Not right now. Daisy lifted her head, nose pointed toward the open gate. She rose and took 2 steps, slow and certain. The leash tightened. Annie followed without hesitation. Daniel straightened, phone still in his hand. He tapped the screen and spoke into it. Mark, the gate, he said to his security chief. I'm going out. Keep the perimeter. I want 2 men behind me. No more. A beat of silence. Then, sir, we've got officers arriving. K9 is en route. We should wait. Daniel looked at Daisy, already pulling toward the sidewalk as if she could see the scent like a line in the air. No, Daniel said, and surprised himself with the steadiness of it. We move now. He stepped off the patio and onto the grass, shoes sinking slightly into the manicured lawn. His tie, loosened earlier, flapped faintly in the breeze. He hated feeling disheveled, hated appearing anything less than in control. But the discomfort was distant now, like a complaint from someone else's body. They passed through the iron gate. Outside the estate, the neighborhood felt different, less quiet, more alive. Cars crawled toward the festival. Families walked in clusters, kids tugging at balloon strings. The air smelled like summer and fryer grease. Somewhere, a microphone squealed briefly, and laughter followed. Daisy moved forward, nose low, then suddenly angled left, pulling toward the corner where the sidewalk met the street. Daniel's mind ran ahead with its usual calculations. Distance to festival, crowd density, cross streets, risk points. He had built buildings by imagining every possible failure before it happened. It was why his company rarely lost money. It was why investors trusted him. It was also why he didn't like this. He didn't like the feeling of following something he couldn't measure. Annie's small feet pattered beside him, keeping pace, hair braids bouncing. She kept both hands on the leash, her face solemn. Annie, Daniel said. How far has Daisy tracked before? Annie glanced up briefly. Far, she answered. When Mr. Keller's beagle got out, Daisy found it by the creek. A beagle by the creek, Daniel thought. Not exactly a child in a festival crowd. Still, Daisy wasn't wandering. She was reading something invisible. They reached the first intersection. A volunteer in a fluorescent vest held up a hand, directing slow traffic toward the church parking lot where the festival had been set up. Daisy stopped at the curb, nose sweeping back and forth like a metronome. She circled once, then pointed her head straight toward the festival entrance and surged forward. Easy, Daniel muttered automatically, even though it wasn't his dog. Annie tightened her grip. Daisy, she said softly, not pleading, just reminding. The hound slowed a fraction, then continued. 2 security men followed behind at Daniel's command, hands near their radios. Daniel noticed the way passers-by looked at them. At him, the white shirt, the expensive watch, the men who moved like they belonged to a different kind of world. He was used to being noticed. He usually enjoyed it in a detached way. Today it felt like a spotlight on his helplessness. As they neared the festival, sound thickened. Music from the stage rolled across the pavement in warm waves. Children shrieked near the inflatable slide. A vendor called out prices. Funnel cake, lemonade, hot dogs, and the smell of cinnamon and grilled onions punched through the air. Daisy's nose snapped up, and she hesitated. Daniel's stomach tightened. There it is, he thought. The moment reality catches up. Daisy lowered her head again and pushed forward into the crowd. People stepped aside, some with smiles, some with mild irritation at being nudged. A woman laughed. Big dog, she called, then noticed Daniel's face and stopped laughing. Daniel tried to keep his pace even. He didn't shove. He didn't bark orders. He moved with a controlled urgency that made people part instinctively, like water around a stone. At the festival entrance, a police cruiser had just pulled up. An officer stepped out, already scanning the crowd. Daniel raised a hand. Officer, my daughter. The officer held up a palm. Sir, I'm Officer Riley. We're setting up a search radius. What's her name? Daniel opened his mouth, but Daisy tugged harder, pulling Annie toward the row of food trucks. Annie looked up at Daniel, and for the first time her voice carried a small crack of fear. Sir. Daisy's working. Daniel's throat tightened. He nodded to the officer, forcing himself to speak like a rational adult. I'm Daniel Whitmore, he said quickly. My daughter's name is Lily. 7. Blonde curls. She was in our yard. I believe she walked toward the festival. We're following our dog. Riley's eyes flicked to Daisy. A dog? A hound, Daniel corrected, almost defensively, then hated that he felt the need to justify anything. She knows Lily's scent. Riley's expression didn't change much, but Daniel saw skepticism there, the kind he was accustomed to in negotiations when someone thought he was bluffing. We have K9 units on the way, Riley said. But do what you need to do. Just stay in sight. Don't interfere. Daniel notched, already moving again. He didn't have the luxury of being offended. Daisy weaved past the funnel cake stand. Her nose dipped toward the ground, then lifted, then dipped again as if tasting the air. Annie kept up, the leash taut like a lifeline. They passed a booth where a middle-aged couple sold homemade jam. The woman smiled at Annie. Honey, is your dog lost? Annie shook her head. No, ma'am, Daniel heard himself say, quieter than he meant to. We are. The woman's smile softened into concern. She didn't ask more. She simply stepped aside and waved others to make room. That small kindness hit Daniel harder than it should have. His mind flashed back to his own childhood county fairs in Ohio. His father's big hand gripping his shoulder so he wouldn't wander. His father smelling of motor oil and cheap aftershave, saying, Don't let the noise pull you away, Danny. Noise don't care if you come back. Daniel hadn't thought about that in years. They reached the center aisle of the festival, where the crowd was thickest. Daisy stopped again, head turning left, then right. Her ears rotated, her tail held low but steady. She circled once, twice. Daniel's pulse hammered. He wanted to grab the leash himself, to do something, anything. but he forced his hands to stay at his sides. This wasn't his skill. This wasn't his world. Annie dropped to her knees on the pavement right there in the middle of adults and strollers. She leaned close to Daisy's face and cupped the dog's cheeks, bringing their foreheads nearly together. Her lips moved in a whisper Daniel couldn't hear. He watched, stunned by the tenderness and certainty in that small gesture. A child speaking to a dog like a partner, not a pet. If this moment touched your heart, take a second to let us know. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe in stories about hope, courage, and quiet strength, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. Daisy inhaled again, deep enough that her ribs showed. Then she jerked her head sharply toward the edge of the festival, toward the quieter street that ran behind the church, and she pulled. Annie sprang up, bracing her feet. "There," Annie said, and her voice was steadier now. Daisy found it. Daniel didn't know what it was: trail, scent, luck, miracle. He only knew that the hound was moving with purpose again. He followed, stepping out of the densest part of the crowd and into a path that opened unexpectedly, as if the day itself was making room. And as they crossed behind the church toward the quieter street, Daniel felt something unfamiliar settle over his skepticism. Not belief, not yet, but the first thin thread of hope strong enough to pull him forward. Daisy did not slow down this time. She pulled hard toward the narrow street behind the church, away from the music and bright tents, away from the smell of sugar and grease. The sudden drop in noise felt like stepping out of a storm into a hollow pocket of air. Daniel's heart thudded in his ears. The street behind the church was lined with old maple trees and a row of parked cars. Fewer people walked here. The festival felt distant, muffled, like a radio turned down in another room. Daisy's nose skimmed the asphalt, then lifted sharply toward a cluster of shrubs near a temporary fence set up for overflow parking. She lunged. "Easy," Daniel said reflexively, but Annie was already bracing. "I've got her," Annie said, breathless but steady. 2 steps later, Daisy barked. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't confused. It was sharp, clear, certain. Daniel froze. The world narrowed to that sound. Beyond the shrubs, near a folding table stacked with cardboard boxes of bottled water, a small figure stood with her back turned. Blonde curls caught in the late afternoon light, a pale blue dress dusted with grass at the hem. Lily. She was staring at a cluster of helium balloons tied to a folding chair, their strings tangled together like bright vines. For half a second, Daniel didn't move. He was afraid that if he blinked, she would disappear. "Lily," he breathed. The name cracked on the way out. She turned. Her face sun-warmed, flushed. A smudge of something sticky near her chin lit up in surprise first, then confusion, then relief so raw it looked almost painful. "Daddy?" Daniel didn't remember crossing the distance between them. One moment he stood rooted to the pavement. The next he was on his knees in the grass beside her, arms wrapping around her small body with a force he didn't know he possessed. She smelled like sunscreen and cotton candy, and strawberries. He pressed his face into her hair, eyes shut tight. "You scared me," he whispered hoarsely. "You scared me, sweetheart. I just wanted to see the music," Lily said into his shoulder, her voice small but unbroken. "I could hear it." He pulled back enough to look at her face, scanning for scratches, bruises, fear. There was none. Only a faint confusion at the intensity of his embrace.